Welcome back to Sika Strength and welcome back to Sika Stan. I'm Owen. This is Dara. We are weightlifting coaches. We have been coaching weightlifting for a combined about 25 years now between the two of us. We've coached all sorts of lifters. We're possibly into the thousands of lifters now, and we see a lot of the same problems coming up all the time. We want to help you solve those problems. The goal of Sika Strength is to stop you wasting your time, stop you wasting 5-10 years of training when you could just make that progress a whole lot faster. Now today, we're talking about how do you determine the right volume and intensity when it comes to your training, when it comes to your programming as a weightlifter. If you're programming for yourself, maybe you don't have a coach, maybe you're not on the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. So the first place we need to start, and the first thing we need to understand, is that volume remains very, very rigid or very, very similar throughout all stages of your weightlifting career and throughout all periods of those training blocks that you're doing at any point in your career. The volume doesn't change a whole lot in weightlifting. The only time it changes a little bit is when we get into this kind of elite level position when we're training 7, 9, 14 times a week, however long we're training. That volume changes reasonably significantly then, but the same principles remain, and that we're moving from a state of higher volume down into these 90% plus ranges, which are very, very important for our 100% or 100% plus ranges. And what we're doing is we're moving from a sufficient amount of volume in that 70, 75, 80% bracket range to give us sufficient base to lift into the 80%. So we're moving through there kind of 5x3, 6x3, we're getting into our doubles, then we're moving into our singles, and then we're going for our singles and then our max attempts. So this remains very, very similar. Now the frequency changes a little bit during the week if we're training a little bit more, but by and large, for a lot of lifters, you're training 4 or 5 times a week, and you might be doing this for several years on end, and you can get really far training 5 times a week as a natural lifter. You can push your limits very, very far into those big numbers. You can get north of 120, 150. You can get north of that 300 kilo total. You can get close to that 160, 200 training 5 times a week. And these principles remain very similar. The nuance isn't really in the adjustment to that volume or the goal of the volume. Now things arise and different things happen, and that's very, very important to adjust with those. And there is an art to this position. But the main thing to understand, and you'll figure it out as you trial and error with yourself, is that you're moving from a state of higher volume all the way down into those singles. It's very, very, very important to do that higher volume. You cannot get away without it. Even if you're a lifter who's taking an absolute ball of PEDs, you're taking every PED under the sun.
Living the dream.
Your goal would still be to do even more volume at the start. This is one of the biggest mistakes amateur and intermediate and even elite lifters make, is that they skip this volume. They don't spend the time doing that lighter volume, and they're kind of afraid we're going to lose touch with those heavier weights. And if we're doing higher volume, we can't do heavier weights, and we're worried that we're going to lose the feel for them. But in fact, moving through that volume and doing that higher volume at the start, then doing our mid-range volume and then our singles are all very, very important stages. And while 90% plus lifts have an incredibly high impact on our 100% plus and our new 1RMs, we can't do those volumes, or we can't do those big lifts without doing the mid-range volume, and it's very hard to hit sufficient mid-range volume unless we're spending enough time in that higher volume stage. We're looking at 4x3, 5x3, maybe in the clean and jerk it's 5x2 plus 2 or something like that, or sometimes we're even doing 5 plus 1 in the clean or sets of 5. That high volume is really important. So we're moving through 3 reasonably distinct phases. Generally, we're starting to look at 70, 80, higher percent volume. A little bit lower than 80, 90, and then lower still in that. So always moving through those volume. It's really important. The biggest issue we see is the lifters get stagnant on those lower reps at those heavier weights.
So the second thing here is intensity. Volume and intensity tend to go hand in hand. They tend to be the first 2 things we look at when we're assigning training programs. So as we're writing out or prescribing training, volume and intensity are 2 main things. Now, with starting intensity, it tends to be much easier to assign that starting intensity than it is to assign that starting volume. That being said, in most weightlifting programs, for the snatch and clean and jerk, intensity tends to be the primary rate of progression or the primary source of progression. We'll tend to bump those weights up. We'll tend to increase the loading in every session. And as a incredibly objective sport, that intensity alteration through weight makes it very, very simple. Now, when we're looking at the starting intensity, It's very common in the strength realms, in the hypertrophy realms, that you would have starting intensities for your squats, your presses, your rows, your pulls in the 50% ranges. Now, for most weightlifting blocks, we are not going to have starting intensities quite that low, and that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is, as Owen said, the starting volumes aren't incredibly high when we look at the weightlifting lifts. When we look at snatch and clean and jerk, you're not going to be doing 5 sets of 10 on the snatch as you would be for something like a squat or a press. So that initially brings that loading from a possibly 50% starting intensity up somewhere to 60 or 65% of 1RM. Now, the other thing to consider when we look at intensity is that intensity is moderated in weightlifting not only by the weight we have on the bar, but also by the relative difficulty of the actual lift we're doing. So, obviously, the snatch and clean and jerk are the two lifts in the sport of weightlifting, but we have a whole host of derivatives, variations, and complexes that can make the snatch, the clean, or the jerk more difficult. To make this a bit more simple, just take the example of a snatch plus overhead squat complex. You might start off quite high volume in this, 3 snatches plus 3 overhead squats at 60% of your 1RM. Now, a very simple progression here in order to increase the intensity but keep the volume quite similar would be 3 plus 3, where the overhead squat gets turned into a snatch balance afterwards. So week 1, I have 3 plus 3 on snatch plus overhead squat at 60 kilos. Week 2, it might be 3 plus 3 snatch plus snatch balance at the same weight. Now, the intensity is the main thing we're changing here. I haven't changed the weight necessarily. My volume has stayed the exact same, but the relative difficulty of that exercise has changed. So when you're thinking about intensity, if we've already ticked the box and we've assigned that volume that we need to hit at the start of the program, when we look at intensity, firstly, it's important that probably not 50% or probably not that low to start off with. 60 or 65% tends to be better. And secondly, when we're looking at increasing or progressing through the intensity levels, it's not just weight we're altering. We can also alter the relative difficulty of the complex, the variation or the derivative of the lift we're doing, and increase that intensity as we go throughout.
Now, the next thing you might be wondering is, do the snatch and clean and jerk or snatch and clean and jerk variations differ much from each other? And the answer is yes, in terms of that absolute volume or the amount of volume we're doing for either one of those, but the principle remains the same when we're going from that state of higher volume down through into those heavier singles and into our maxing. So the snatch will generally be about 10 to 20% more volume, depending on the lifter. The number of sets you might do, for example, in the snatch, you could start with 5, 6, maybe 7 sets of 3 in the snatch at the very early stages of a block. But realistically, we're probably never going to go over 5 sets in the clean and jerk, and we're going to start somewhere like 2 plus 2, 1 plus 3, 3 plus 1, something like that. So we're not really hitting that kind of, we're not going to be doing like 3 plus 3 clean and jerk, although it can happen, but we're not going to be doing stuff like 7 sets of that. Generally, the clean and jerk, the weights are heavier, so when we lift those heavier weights, that starting point is a little bit heavier, just the absolute weight we're using, so the fatigue is a little bit higher than that. And so in comparison to the snatch, which is a little bit more speedy, a little bit more precise, they manifest themselves in different ways as the training block goes on. The snatch is something that I always like to think about, where you're very slowly revealing kind of a structure from stone. If you're like a marble, a guy who chiseled stone, what do they call those people?
A sculptor.
A sculpture, that's the word that was massively eluding me. You're like a sculpture, you're very slowly revealing this masterpiece, and you're fine-tuning every aspect of that, and you're revealing your technique, you're fine-tuning every bit, and every time you approach the barbell to do your working sets, you're given an opportunity to make it a little bit more perfect. And you might not be the strongest lifter, but if you're fast and precise enough, you can lift some big weights in the snatch. However, when it comes to the clean and jerk, it is a little bit more of a strength exercise. And a lot of times people would have kind of referred to the clean and jerk as a strength exercise before compared to the snatch. And technique is incredibly important in the clean and jerk. But for that same reason that we see throwers, NFL players, cleaning massive weights, power cleaning huge weights, but probably couldn't power snatch, full snatch 100 kilos, but they could power clean 190 kilos or full clean it. It is because the attributes last, or the attributes are a little bit more important for that clean and jerk. That power, strength, and speed are just a little bit more important. That physical robustness, that kind of ability to move big weights is a little bit more important in the clean and jerk. So those other areas in our training are very, very important. Our pulling strength, our squatting strength, how fresh we are when it comes into those clean and jerks, because we can be really slow and a little bit tired and fatigued in the snatch, but we can still get a quality training session in at 60-70% because we're fine-tuning some stuff. But when it comes to the clean and jerk, if you're supposed to be maxing out in 2 weeks' time, 3 weeks' time, that 60% isn't going to be that useful in the clean and jerk. And if you're not strong, fresh, and in a good peaked position, you're just not going to get a lot of benefit from that. But snatching, a lot of you probably have had these workouts if you've been training for a while. You're doing 60% in the snatch and it feels like an absolute ton of bricks. And then a week later, you go for your max session and you hit a new PB in fantastic technique. Or at least I hope you've experienced that. Whereas in the clean and jerk, that doesn't really happen after a certain stage. Maybe as a ranked beginner, that does happen where 50 kilos feels terrible and then suddenly you clean and jerk 80 in a few weeks because you adjust something in your technique. But eventually, as those gains peter out, as you get more further into your weightlifting career, the kind of happenstance or technical changes that lead to big PBs don't really happen anymore. And more so in the clean and jerk, it really becomes about being in good condition, having done that higher volume, having had the right squat, having done enough pulls, you're doing enough squatting, you're doing enough pulling, you're loading appropriately, you're fresh enough for your clean and jerk sessions. So for that reason, the clean and jerk doesn't rely so much on the fine tuning compared to the snatch. Now, it still is important and we're still looking for that volume at the start and moving through those weights, but the clean and jerk is a little bit more attribute driven in comparison to the snatch, where we're really acclimatizing that volume. If you looked at someone like Klokov, talked about this before, if you saw doing his seminars years ago, he moved through big snatches all the time, but very rarely did clean and jerks. And he talked about essentially that clean and jerking can't be something that you can kind of just do casually. You have to be on the road for a big clean and jerk. Gabriel, if you see his training, he went from Monday, Wednesday and Friday, big doubles, 1 to 2 clean and jerk doubles in the clean and jerk. But then in the snatch, he was doing things like 15 doubles and 170 kilos. So while they're big extreme examples, I hope they're a little bit of an example of teaching and how that works for the clean and jerk for your own training in the snatch, and that you always do a bit more snatching, a little bit more frequency in the snatching, probably something like 2 to 1 in terms of your training, and the snatch is a little bit more finesse and fine tuning, whereas the clean and jerk is a bit more, you need to be on the right path.
The final thing then, when we're looking at volume intensity, when we're looking at programming generally and where to start, a lot of the time people will assign certain feelings or assign certain views around that to their own particular situation. And the big thing with all of this, particularly in weightlifting, is you are not in any way special. Most of the time, the first week of every block of programming will start out pretty much the exact same. All you're doing is just getting on board with the programming. You just need to start. You just need to get into the gym. People waste a massive amount of time. We're talking about over the course of their career, possibly years worth of good sessions that they could be doing by going to the gym for 4 weeks, doing technique work or getting in just a technique block by lifting light for a few weeks. It really is a massive waste of time. When you're going into a weightlifting block, you need to be doing the right volume, you need to be doing the right intensity, and you need to be doing it with correct session plans. Just showing up to the gym with this arbitrary thing of, I'm only going to move 40 kilos today and I'm just going to move weight around fast is just a complete waste of your time, of your coach's time, and of your possible potential of the weights you could lift. If you're doing weightlifting, you need to be going to the gym with a set program and going through that program from week 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. This goes along the very same lines of if you constantly took an off season between every single weightlifting block, you would be wasting a massive amount of time. So just if we break down the numbers very quickly, most people are going to do 8 or 12 week blocks for their weightlifting, particularly in the amateur realms. If you were then to take 4 weeks off in between each of those blocks, that's 25% of your total time, or in the extreme case, 33% of your total training time is wasted in this kind of grey area where you're not really doing anything. And to be honest, that doesn't carry over. It's not like if you spent 25% of your time in off-season strength and hypertrophy work, you would have some positive benefits from it. It wouldn't be the best thing possible for your weightlifting, but you'd be in great shape, you'd be strong, you'd be jacked, you'd be powerful, and that could help with the weightlifting eventually. But if you just kind of, for want of a better term, pussyfoot around the place, just moving weights around, not really following any structure, not following any program, you will waste the majority of your career in weightlifting. So you're not different from anyone else. None of us are. We really don't need to be altering things at all too much. If you're doing a weightlifting block, you just start the weightlifting block and get into it, and that will earn the best results possible.
Now, if you are looking to outsource your own programming for weightlifting, you're like, okay, this is nice to know about, but I just want someone to do it for me. Check out the Sika Strength app on iOS and Android. Dynamic loading adjustment, coach bot answers your questions, trained on a lot of these questions you guys have asked us. Video library, program library, mainstream weightlifting program, specific weightlifting programs like snatching, cleaning, jerking, and we can then look at, their main weightlifting program where it takes you through those sessions, just the loading as you put in your inputs in your sessions. And you've got the strength work, maybe you want a bigger press, bigger squat, all that is there for you on the Seek Strength app, iOS and Android. It's free 7-day trial for everyone who signs up. You just need to sign up, make an account, make that, and then cancel it before the end of the 7 days, and you won't be charged anything, so you can get a good look around. And as hard it is to believe, I suppose, from the person trying to sell you something, people don't really want to get off the app. People are getting a lot of great benefits from it. We're very, very happy with the app. We've done 9 updates in 7 months or similar. We're always changing it. We're always trying to increase the capacity app, listen to people's feedback, make it a better app, and every couple of months we feel like we're getting a lot better with that. And this, literally decades of experience gone into that app. So the big thing in Reach Seek Strength is just you not waste your time training. Just want you to make the gains that you could make faster. We learned the hard way and from other great coaches and athletes.